And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Ambassador Mark Green, who is going to moderate the lunchtime proportion of our discussion. Ambassador Green, when you're ready.
Good afternoon. That word seems to be universal. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. It's good to see all of you. I'd like to begin by thanking Ambassador O'Sullivan and his team at the EU delegation, and Antoine and his team at the European Parliament Liaison Office for putting this event together today. More importantly, I want to thank them for their ongoing friendship and support. As most of you know, today's discussion is intended as a bookend event to programs that were organized in Cleveland and Philadelphia this past summer at the Republican and Democratic National Conventions, respectively. Even though our program together in Cleveland was only 5 months ago, I think we all think of it as being almost a lifetime ago, given all the changes that we've seen here and, quite frankly, across the globe. Since July, the UK and EU have struggled to understand just what shape Brexit might take. Just last Sunday, Italian voters rejected Prime Minister Renzi's constitutional reform referendum, and Austria narrowly turned back an anti-establishment challenge in the rerun of its presidential election. The French center-right has held primary elections to select its candidate for president. Angela Merkel has announced that she'll be running again next year. And as some of you might have heard, there was an election in the U.S. I can't remember what it was for. Obviously, a great deal has changed. But to be honest, if you take a look back at our speakers and our program in Cleveland, just back in July, speakers like Speaker Ryan, Governor Kasich, Senators Cotton and Ernst, and General Flynn, I think you'll see that the messages that we heard last summer in Cleveland are really valid today. They still apply. All of our speakers in Cleveland talked about the need for America to show leadership and engagement in the world. Well, we at IRI believe that that has never been more important, nor will it change. They also said, and we also believe, that that leadership must be comprised in large part about a strong partnership between the U.S. and the EU. Together we must be a global force for good in a way that we have been at some of the key moments in history, in the aftermath of World War II and the Cold War. Now, I think we all realize that the challenges that we face in carrying out this task are indisputably serious. I think we also realize they're just a little bit less formidable because we do not face them alone. Working together, the transatlantic relationship, we have the experience and expertise that we can share and from which we can learn. And we face the turbulence of these times working from a stable foundation that is built upon common values and principles, ageless values and principles that are as important on your side of the Atlantic as on ours. Thankfully, and most importantly, as we undertake the challenges of the months and years ahead, we have strong leaders upon whom we can call in these times. And it's my privilege to introduce one of those leaders to you today. Senator Ron Johnson, as you know, is the senior senator from the great state of Wisconsin, which means that, like me, he is but a temporary guest in this town from that great state. What I would tell you is that Senator Johnson stepped away from a highly successful business career to serve in the U.S. Senate. He had been the chief executive officer of a Wisconsin-based manufacturing firm that had very successfully competed in the global economy. a company that created good jobs, a company that helped real Americans support themselves and upon which family incomes were built. But Senator Johnson, Ron Johnson back in those days, was fed up with federal deficits, slow economic activity, high unemployment, and woefully inadequate job creation. And so he put his career aside to stand for the U.S. Senate in 2010. They said he was crazy. Look what he was giving up for something that was uncertain at best, but he felt compelled to serve and compelled to lead. That year, 2010, in his first ever run for elective office, he unseated a 3-term incumbent U.S. Senator. He has since served with distinction as chairman of the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, as well as a member of the Budget, Foreign Relations, and Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committees. As you may know, those of you who are close watchers of U.S. elections, he was, in this past cycle, called one of the most vulnerable Republicans in the U.S. Senate. Actually, that's wrong. He was declared politically dead. He went from being vulnerable to having no chance whatsoever. Unfortunately for the left, he decided not to cooperate. He not only defeated the former senator he had beaten the first time, but he increased his vote total by over 300,000 votes in the process. His experience in private business, his leadership on crucial issues of homeland security, foreign affairs, and trade, and just maybe also his Norwegian and German roots, make him an important figure for all of us. A figure who understands the importance of the transatlantic relationship, what it does mean, and what it can mean. It also makes him a perfect speaker for us today. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend and fellow Badger, Senator Ron Johnson from the great state of Wisconsin.
Thank you, Mark. I should say Congressman Green and Ambassador O'Sullivan. I appreciate the opportunity. I actually like creating low expectations, and I think Mark has kind of raised the bar there, which I don't like. I come from the business world, so it's all about under-promising and over-delivering. But I do appreciate that kind of introduction. I've seen you had a very impressive list of speakers. Again, I hate being, I hate hard acts to follow. But what I have to offer is probably a little bit different perspective. Because I come from the business world in manufacturing, just to understand a little bit about myself, my education is in accounting. I'm one of those wild and exciting bean counters. My business was in manufacturing, and we did export to about 20 different countries. So I've traveled around the world trying to sell products, and it is true in 2010 I stepped up to the plate to serve my nation, primarily because of two reasons. The passage of the health care law, which I believe was an assault on our personal freedom. I don't think it's going to work, and I know particularly Europeans here may differ with me in terms of my evaluation of what a government-run health care system offers. But also because, as an accountant, as a business person, I saw these unsustainable deficits. The fact that we were mortgaging our children's future. So that's really why I stepped up to the plate, why I ran, and quite honestly, why I ran for re-election. I realize we are in interesting times, I would say perilous times, globally. And it's interesting listening or reading about your breakout sessions about security and about economic prosperity, because as chairman of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs, I took over that chairmanship when Republicans got a majority in the Senate. First thing I did was very businesslike. I developed a mission statement for my committee. Kind of unusual in Congress. I'm not sure there's any other committee in Congress that actually has developed a mission statement. As a business person, I found that is very helpful. It'll send the direction for your organization. So my mission statement is very simple: to enhance the economic and national security of America. Those two things are inextricably linked. You simply can't have economic prosperity without security and safety. It's table stakes. And right now, both of those things are at risk. To explain a little bit what's been happening since I entered politics, I think it is interesting to go back to really what gave rise to my even running. It really was the Tea Party. It was Obamacare, it was those deficits, but it was this movement in America called the Tea Party, going back to our foundational roots of a limited government, embracing America's mission statement contained in our Declaration of Independence. You've probably all heard it, but let me repeat it. We hold these truths to be self-evident. By the way, I love that phrase. It's just so obvious that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among those are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. You know, people like me, people who support the Tea Party, believe in that mission statement, and also believe that we as a civilized world, as modern democracies, quite honestly, as the United States of America, are wandering from that path where we value individual liberty above all things. Now, I'm a proud American. Mark said that we've been a good force in the world. I would say we've been a phenomenally good force in the world. Not only America, but working with our Western democratic allies. We have been a phenomenal force for good in the world. But we're a phenomenal force for good in the world when we lead with those values. Embracing freedom, embracing free market capitalism. It's not perfect, but it's free market capitalism combined with a limited government that allows people to aspire and to build and to create and to innovate. That, for example, in America allows us to be about 5% of the world's population, yet we produce 20 to 25% of all world's goods and services. That success should set a tone, should be an example for the rest of the world to embrace and hopefully put their nations on similar type of paths. So from my standpoint, I don't believe America can be the world's policeman. What America ought to be and what Western democracy ought to be is we should be that shining city on a hill. We should provide the example of what actually works in terms of individual liberty and freedom. And when it comes to military involvement, peace through strength, but not being the world's policeman, but where it is in our national interest, where it's in our world's vital interest, where it's in our interest to keep peace throughout the world, provide stability where we can. Not impose our form of government, but provide stability. That's personally my own vision. Now, going back a little bit to my committee so you understand what my goals are. I've really got two committees in one, Homeland Security and then Governmental Affairs, which is the Senate Oversight Committee. On the governmental affairs side, that's really more, from my standpoint, about economic prosperity, the way I've set the committee up. We've got two basic subcommittees, one on government regulation and one identifying duplicated programs, waste, fraud, and abuse in programs. Again, I believe we have too much government. I think government is too intrusive, too controlling. When you take a look at what we need to do to produce prosperity, get the kind of economic growth that we're going to need to address all these problems, I think there are three main problem areas. Overregulation. In America, there are numerous studies show that it costs about $2 trillion per year to comply with federal government regulations. Now, if you put that on a more personal level, that's about $14,800 per year per family complying with regulations. Now, nobody suggests we shouldn't have regulations, but that's way more than we need. And it's crushing innovation, it's crushing the animal spirits, the type of entrepreneurial effort we really need to get our economy moving forward. In America, we have an uncompetitive tax system. I don't like the term tax reform because, trust me, you can reform the tax code and make it even worse. So the term I would like to use, what I'd like to drive our process to come up with a benchmark competitive tax system is tax simplification. I come from the business world, the KISS principle, keep it simple. We need to keep our tax system simple and competitive with the rest of the world. And then I do believe energy is a vital part of global competitiveness here in America. We truly can be and should be energy independent. And that would be good not only for America, but for the world. So I think we ought to utilize those energy resources so we have a strong economy, so we can actually afford the type of pollution controls, because that's a goal we all share. We all want a clean environment. Now, on the Homeland Security side of the committee, we have four basic priorities: border security, cybersecurity, protecting our critical infrastructure, particularly our electrical grid, and combating Islamic terror. Those are the 4 priorities of our committee. And I would say and I would suggest for all Western democracies, those are top priorities. When I speak to young people, particularly kids in college, and they're asking, thinking about what they want to do, I say concentrate on computer science with an emphasis on cybersecurity. This issue is not going away. When you take a look at, and of course we suspect it was Russia that hacked into the Ukrainian electrical grid. That ought to be a wake-up call to all of us in terms of turning attention to how vulnerable our basic infrastructure, things like our electrical grid, truly is. So we need to focus on that priority of providing physical security so we can then focus on what we need to do from a standpoint of economic prosperity. And again, to reemphasize the point, you achieve economic prosperity by unleashing the innovation, the creativity people want to build and aspire, which means you better not crush that type of innovation, that type of entrepreneurial spirit with over-regulation and too much government. And America, we're on the path. I think Europe is further ahead of us. But on a personal, political, ideological note, I find it frightening in America that we had 13 million, mainly young people, voted for an avowed socialist. Listen, I can imagine why back in the 30s, in the midst of the Great Depression, where laissez-faire capitalism didn't seem to work out that well, we needed more regulation, we needed some more certainty, why people might have experimented with socialism. But now we have the historical perspective, and we have to realize socialism didn't work. Communism didn't work. It allowed totalitarian regimes to rise, and literally resulted in the deaths of tens of millions, the murder of tens of millions of people. And of course, the experimentation continues. Venezuela is an oil-rich nation. It's an economic basket case because of the socialist, communist type of policies. And of course, Cuba, if you've ever been there, should be an island paradise. It's also an economic basket case because they've embraced this concept of an economic system that simply doesn't work. It fails. It fails miserably. In addition to Chairman of Homeland Security, I'm also Chairman of the European Subcommittee of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. It's been very interesting. I wasn't on the Foreign Relations Committee until the second Congress. So my third and fourth year, I joined that, and I joined as the ranking member. And so really began a more robust process of meeting with delegations from Europe, both country delegations as well as European Union delegations. And the first couple of years, the discussions always started, centered, and ended on Edward Snowden. And America's ability, or certainly desire to gather intelligence so we can try to keep this nation safe, well, that was pretty offensive to our European partners. And I understand that. But then you had your own 9/11. You had the terrorist attacks in Brussels and in Paris, Charlie Hebdo in particular. Never hear about Edward Snowden anymore. Now it's all about, where's America? We need your leadership. And I agree with that. So, before I turn it over to questions, my bottom line point is, I think it is vital for world peace and stability, for the security of our own nations, that we, as a committed coalition of the willing of Western democracies, we identify the problems, we be very clear-eyed in our analysis of them, admitting we've got these problems, realizing that there's a genocide ongoing in Syria. The fact that we bugged out of Iraq allowed that genocide to grow and for that region to destabilize. ISIS isn't going away. Islamic terror is not going away. It's a metastasizing, it's an evolving threat, and we have to take it seriously. And realize that it's our leadership as Western democracies, recognizing that NATO is a crucial alliance. It needs to be supported. It is true that from a standpoint of America, from our viewpoint, it sure would be nice if every NATO member met that 2% requirement, that threshold, of at least spending 2% of your economy on your own national defense, on our joint defense. It sure makes it a whole lot easier for America to shoulder a disproportionate burden politically. So I think it's important that you understand that political imperative. But bottom line is we have got to understand and recognize these problems. We have to face them because we will not have the economic prosperity that we need to generate the revenue that's going to be required to start addressing these massive deficits that all Western democracies face. Honor the promises of these benefits that have been promised. Having the military might, the strength to maintain peace. You know, Donald Trump, just in a speech, basically had it right. He said, we don't build up our military to go to war. We build up our military strength to prevent war. I think that's just absolutely essential viewpoint, and that's what we need to do. So, again, from my standpoint, that's I've kind of laid out my perspective on these things, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Anybody? Sir.
You said that one of your focal points coming in was the budget deficit. Need to get that under control. Two questions. General question: how do you feel you've done on that over 6 years? And secondly, if President-elect Trump proposes a budget that would significantly increase the deficit, which is what many people now are expecting, how will you react to that?
Well, there will be resistance. But let me tell you what has happened. Because America did elect a bunch of fiscal conservatives out of the Tea Party movement, very few people understand this, but we've actually reduced discretionary spending by $175 billion per year from when I first entered office. Now, the problem is mandatory spending, which is now 70% of the budget, grew by more than $400 billion per year. And the projected deficit over the next 30 years is $103 trillion, comprised of three components. Social Security, about $14 trillion deficit over the next 30 years. Medicare, about $34 trillion, and then over $50 trillion interest on the debt. So you kind of focus on what we need to address if we're not going to have to pay $50 trillion of interest payments to our creditors. Now, the number one component of the solution, I don't care whether you're talking about the debt and deficit, or trying to save Social Security and Medicare, or have the resources to stop hollowing out our military, is economic growth. And kind of go right back to that imperative of what we need to do. But let me just describe how powerful economic growth it is in terms of component of a solution. We have been growing right around 2%, maybe a little bit under, since the Great Recession. Now, since the Great Depression, on average, the American economy has grown by 3.2% on average. And after a really severe recession, normally you'd grow at a far higher pace than 3.2. It's just math. I mean, you're starting from a lower base, so you should be growing more rapidly. So we've had meager economic growth. Going from 2 to 3% over 10 years would add $14 trillion of economic activity over 10 years. 2 to 4% is $29 trillion. Even with the meager economic growth we've had since 2009, revenue to the federal government has increased by $1.1 trillion per year. So from my standpoint, as a business person, looking at this thing, root cause analysis, how do you solve the problem? Everything we ought to be doing in the Trump administration ought to first be focused on how do we get our economy jump-started so we have robust economic growth, because then we'll have the resources to start addressing these problems. So in America, we can start rebuilding our infrastructure. We have to do that. We are lagging. Our interstate highway system is 60 years old. It's not in good shape. Our global competitors are investing in infrastructure, so if we're not going to be left behind, we've got to invest in that. But, and by the way, I'm not opposed to actually borrowing money for a true long-term capital good. The problem with the $800 billion stimulus under Obama for the shovel-ready projects is probably less than 10% was spent on infrastructure. The rest was spent on operations within state and local governments. It was, I'm sorry, wasted from a standpoint of mortgaging our children's future and not getting a long-term capital good out of it. So again, it's all about economic growth, doing everything we can, using the power of the executive to reduce the regulatory burden. We got to stand up with the competitive tax system, benchmark that against the world. That's got to be our focus. I mean, you get the microphone, you figure out who I'm going to go to, okay?
Thank you. My name is Yaya Fanusi. I came to this country in 1967, and when I became a citizen and registered to be a voter, I registered as a Republican. I voted twice for Ross Perot, I voted for Romney, and I now voted for Trump. That means great changes are coming. The only suggestion I have to make to you and your European partners, stop interfering in regime change
among people who don't look like you in the rest of the world. I represent the United States of Africa 2017 project. 2019, there will be a referendum in which the voters in the 54 countries in Africa will vote to be like America or Australia, one continent and one government. Thank you.
So I appreciate that. I think if you listen to President-elect Trump, it's kind of what he's kind of laying out there is only what's in our national vital interest. But I happen to be proud of the fact, I mean, we had Congressman Green here. He was certainly there with PEPFAR in Africa. I do think, you know, I'm proud of the fact that it's you know, the American people that have invested, you know, literally billions of dollars to try and prevent the scourge or try and prevent the spread of AIDS, reduce that spread. You know, when there are devastating tsunamis in Indonesia, it's the American fleet that rushes to the rescue. It's, you know, when you have devastating floods in Pakistan, it's America, the USAID that provides foodstuff. So that's, to me, that's the positive engagement. I'm a fiscal conservative, but I'm all for well-spent foreign aid because I think it can be a surrogate for military spending. It's providing its leadership through example, okay? Thank you. Again, whoever's got the mic, right here. Tell one until I get the hook.
You talked about economic growth, and I was wondering, with the new administration coming in, what do you see are the what are the strengths of the transatlantic economic relationship that the new administration can build on?
Well, first of all, I'm an unabashed free trader. I think one thing, America is the world's largest economy. I think we do have the opportunity to be a little more magnanimous. And I think from just a morality standpoint, you've got 7 billion human beings outside of America, some of them obviously living in very difficult situations. You know, I'd like to be able to give them the opportunity to create goods that our consumers then can enjoy and buy at a very low price. There's nothing wrong with that, okay? That being said, and I was comforted, I met with the Commerce Secretary designee, the nominee, Wilbur Ross, and you know, they're very well aware of the harm, the danger of something like a Smoot-Hawley. I think they also recognize, and I recognize as well, there are, you know, when you are magnanimous, when you do open up your markets to different countries, people do take advantage of it. There are real trade abuses, and I think, and I don't want to put words in, you know, the President-elect mouth or his Commerce Secretary nominee's mouth, but from my standpoint, it looks like they're far more focused on targeting those abuses and really looking at a process of adjudicating those types of trade abuses, those types of damages very rapidly. Because the problem is, and I've witnessed these types of abuses, by the time you finally win in court, oftentimes in a very obvious, you know, trade abuse, that business is out of business. And just an example, in my industry, I've had to compete against Finnish sheet product, plastic sheet product, being sold in America for under the cost of the resin I have to buy. And these, you know, resin markets are global. So some of these trade abuses are just easy to evaluate on a, you know, dollars and cents basis, and I think a rapid adjudication process. So again, I'm looking at what the Trump administration is going to do, and I'm hoping it'll be far more targeted, but open to free and fair trade, with an emphasis on fair though as well. But no, I certainly understand it's extremely important for the world economy to engage in free trade. And just real quick, the micro example I use is, let's say you got 10 farmers, 10 different crops. Just conceptually, is it better for every farmer to try and raise 10 crops inefficiently, or have each farmer raise one of those crops very efficiently in trade? The answer is obvious. Now, it gets more complex than that, obviously, and there are winners and losers, but in general, you need to keep that free trade open. There's a question over here.
Senator Johnson, with full respect for your eloquent presentation, for your business and political activities, I have a short comment and then a question. You stressed growth and prosperity. It's nothing new. It is something what has been for centuries, and every system advocates it. And we wanted to eliminate, for instance, poverty in the United States when President Johnson declared war against poverty. And now we have more than ever before. Now it comes to prosperity and growth. you notice that most of the US industries moved abroad to different countries because we followed in advice. Substitute manufacturing industry with service industry. But now when you call for a ticket, for instance, in airline, you get a voice somewhere at the other part of the world. My question is, however, can we reproduce the American potent economy as it was once upon a time? When we lost factories, when we have ghost cities, and you have it in Wisconsin too, and when we go from Maine to Florida, and we can see the former factories empty, the people on welfare, and everywhere you have dollar stores instead of great other. How can we now restore the economy to make America and the world prosperous, happy, peaceful, and so on?
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, let me throw a little concept out to you. Anybody here in this room think it'd be a good thing if America went back 100 or 150 years when, I don't know what percent, Carol, you've got to get this for me, okay? What percent of the American workforce was involved in agriculture? Anybody think that'd be a good idea? I think it'd be a terrible idea. What's happened, now we could bemoan the loss of farmers. We lost all these farming jobs. Well, what's happened is we've become unbelievably productive from a variety of reasons, but all based on innovators and people that aspire to build things and create things and become more productive. So now you have probably a single-digit number of Americans producing food not only for us, but for the world. That's a good thing. Well, the same type of dynamic, it's not universal, it's not explain everything, the same dynamics happening in manufacturing. So the advantage of free trade that's fair, you take advantage of the comparative advantage of different regions of the world. What the less developed countries offer is really available and cheap labor, which puts a lot of pressure on American labor, no doubt about it. But we need to have a free flow of capital so that America is going to compete in manufactured products that require greater sophistication, that require greater technology, more productive manufacturing versus very high labor content product. It really doesn't make a whole lot of sense for America to be churning out high labor content products when we've got 7 billion people that want to increase their living standards and are willing to work a whole lot cheaper and then provide these products to American consumers a whole lot cheaper than if we were to throw up protectionist barriers and, for example, have to pay $200 for a shirt versus buy them for 5 or 10 or 15 bucks in Walmart. So again, I know it's a messy system. I know there's definitely losers in that equation. And the problem you have in terms of really promoting free trade is the losers are very visible. It's very visible when a plant shuts down because they have to compete globally, and they've got to manufacture in a lower labor situation. That's very visible. Those 500 or 1,000 people. Now we offer things like assistance for those individuals that are dislocated, and we should. I think it's the right thing to do. But if we don't do that, well, let's put the benefit, of course, of that is every consumer pays a whole lot less for products. And if you throw up those protectionist barriers, now every consumer is going to be paying a whole lot more. So you got to look at this. It's not a zero-sum game. You got to look at the entire, both sides of the equation here, and we don't do a very good job of that from a political standpoint. Sir, I guess this last one? Yeah. Okay.
Eric Coolish, American Shipper Magazine, cover international trade logistics. So just to follow up on that, I mean, the way you've espoused it sounds a lot different from what we hear from the president-elect. Does that mean, especially when he talks about companies that outsource and will put tariffs on them somehow? So does that mean if that is proposed, you would oppose those kinds of trade policies? And second of all, what do you think about the reporting now on the nomination of General Kelly to be head of Homeland Security?
Well, let me start. General Kelly is an outstanding choice. I toured Guatemala with him. He's testified before our committee a number of times. By the way, I really like the organization, the management style of military officers, and I think Donald Trump sees the same thing that I see now as a business guy coming to Washington, D.C. The U.S. military is probably the finest training organization in the world, and so the people that rise to the top of that organization are really good leaders, and General Kelly's going to be a phenomenal choice, so I'm highly supportive of that. I laid out what I would support in terms of, trade policy and, rapid adjudication of trade disputes and, clamping down on the trade abuses. But I'll certainly be providing counsel. By the way, prior to the Wisconsin primary, I talked to Donald Trump over the phone. I said, got to be a little careful here in Wisconsin. Our exports equal our imports. We have a zero trade balance in Wisconsin. It's incredibly important that overseas markets remain open to our agriculture and our manufacturing products. And oh, by the way, those imports, again, this part of the equation is never talked about. Imports create a lot of jobs too, in distribution and as components to other manufacturing that also make our products competitive so we can export them. So again, I don't like demagoguery. I don't like, I like laying out all the facts, the entire reality. That's how you actually solve these problems. So as Chairman of Homeland Security and Government Affairs, I can hold hearings on just about anything because I have jurisdiction oversight of the entire federal government. So you can rest assured my committee is going to be laying out realities. We've already done this, 19 hearings on border security. We're the ones raising the reality that the unaccompanied children crisis is at the same level as it was in 2014. We've just got more efficient at processing, processing and dispersing kids. So we're going to be holding out these realities. That includes realities on trade as well. So again, thank you all. I hope it didn't scare you. I hope it didn't depress you. I have that effect sometimes on people.
Senator Johnson, it just remains really for me to thank you for that tour de force. Ambassador, you were worried Ambassador Green had overpromised. I assure you that you over-delivered. Thank you so much, and I'd ask you once again to give a round of applause to the Senator for his great presentation. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our conference. I'd like to thank everyone who contributed, the panelists, of course, our partners, IRI and NDI. We've reached the end of this particular cycle of following the U.S. election. We have not certainly reached the end of the debate. I hope that today was an important opportunity to underline the degree of mutual interdependence across the Atlantic, the degree of interest we have in each other's success, and we look forward to working with the new administration and with the new Congress in continuing to build on that and to develop it further. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you all again on other events and other occasions. Thank you very much indeed.